Hello everybody, today we're going to be going over how to make a space claim using the proper steps. First thing you want to do is open up the layout file for the subsystem you're going to be adding a space claim to. In this case, we're going to be following a demo for adding in a valve. No, actually, let's add in a manifold into lower plumbing here. So I'm going to, right now I'm in the vehicle assembly file, I'm going to open up the layout file for lower plumbing. Let me see, I believe this is it. I'm going to open that in a window. You don't have to go through the vehicle layout file. In fact, it's better if you don't. I just happen to have that open. So let's see. This does indeed look like, oops. Yeah, this is indeed the lower plumbing layout file, so let's get going. So let's say that I want the manifold to be right about middle of the lower plumbing assembly, and ideally you think through at least a little bit preliminary about where this part is going to go. The point of a space claim is to claim a bit of space for your part, so that other people know that it will be there and that they should avoid encroaching on that space with their stuff. So you want a general idea of where it's going to be, but you also want to model it in a way where it can be moved around without too much headache. You want it to be pretty flexible as a part goes. So let's say I talk to my team and we think that middle of the airframe or middle of the lower plumbing is about the right place for it. I'm going to model, well, first off you have to make sure you have this file checked out. So let's see, I have it checked out at the moment, which is good. That's what we want to see. You can access that by right clicking, and if it says checked in, that means you have it currently checked out. If it says checked out, or if it says check out, click on that and then you will check that part out so you can edit and save those edits. Anyway, going back to the part navigator, I'm going to quickly show you some strategies I think would be helpful for modeling a space claim that is made to be moved around a little bit more than other parts. So first off, I'm going to create a offset plane. I'm going to use the bottom plane, but you can use whatever. The bottom plane is probably the best bet. I'm going to arbitrarily set it somewhere around the middle. And then from here, I'm going to create a sketch. I'm going to use that plane. If you ever have stuff blocking your way, you can always, hide it. Hide all this stuff stuff like that. And let's say, actually I want those struts in there. Let's say the manifold takes up that that space. Now, ideally you need to have some sort of dimensions for how big your part will eventually be. And this can be a guess, this can be an estimate, but ideally it's bigger than, the space claim is bigger than the actual part you will end up making to take the spot of the manifold. So let's say I think my manifold is eventually going to be like, 2.5 by 2 by 1.5. In that case, I'm going to make this like 2.75. What did I say? I think I said like 2. So I'm going to arbitrarily put a 2.5 inch margin on all of the dimensions. I don't really have a standard set out for how much bigger you should make your space claim. try to keep it as accurate as possible, but if you don't know anything about the part that's eventually going to be taking its place, be a little generous so you're not going to be hurting for space when you have a more finalized CAD model later down the road. Okay, so the next thing is at least adding some constraints so this manifold isn't completely floating around. In this case, I'm going to use a few construction lines, which are basically lines that do not contribute to the final geometry of the model. They're purely used for applying constraints and setting locations and setting up the geometry for later use, sort of. And I kind of just glossed over how to do that there. Actually, I'm going to hide this injector. 1 second. Okay, that's better. I just kind of glossed over. You want to right click, and then the first thing, it'll say convert to construction or convert to reference. Click on that, and it won't be included in any extrudes, and it won't show up after you close the sketch. So I'm going to add a few constraints to it, so it gives us some degrees of freedom to move around our manifold, but it doesn't make it crazy free where it can do a bunch of stuff we don't want it to do. So you can see it now is constraining the manifold to be rotationally based. So now I can use like an angle tool if I wanted to, use this base axis or base set of axes to define an angle. Let's say, it's going to say it's over constrained. That's fine. Let's say I wanted it to be, oh no. Okay. Let's see what there you go. Okay, that's better. Let's say I wanted it to be 50 degrees from this x-axis. I can set that, and then now the only unconstrained axis is, actually it says it's fully constrained, but I don't really believe that. There's a missing constraint here somewhere. But let's say for now that's good. Eventually you can change the radial position of this as well, and really have full freedom to move it around and orientate it as you like. You can also change the angle which this is placed at in case you want to get a little bit more flexibility. The idea is by only changing the angle and by changing this radial distance, which I currently am not setting, you can pretty much have free reign over the position on this plane of your manifold geometry. So if you do need to change it should be pretty easy. And I said it would be 1 inch on the height, or 1.5 inches on the height, so I'll, again, just arbitrarily set it to be 1.75, and make sure you click none there so it creates a new body. And right off the bat here, I'm going to assign it a feature color. We don't really have a standard for this yet. I might roll one out in the future, but for now, feel free to do whatever. So this is now a new body here. I'm going to change this extrude to indicate that this is the space claim feature, like so. And now if we wanted to, we can modify the position of this space claim by changing the vertical position of this plane, and you can see it updates, it drags that space claim with it. We can also, not in here, but in the sketch here, we can rotate, we can change the rotational location by modifying this angle here to also change where it is. And there's some random constraint that's driving this radius to be set, but you'll also have control over that as well. Okay, cool. So that's the geometry setup. The next step is making this a part file, so it can be stored in. And the thing is, we're going to make this part file the same part file that will eventually hold the actual manifold geometry. So your space claim is basically the first version of your actual part that you're going to make, and they're going to live in the same file together. So according to other videos that we've made, the process is making a new file, following the naming convention, where it's like it's going to be L400 and then number dash number. In this case, since we're dealing with lower plumbing, it'll be -04, and if looking to this assembly, the next part number up would be -005, like so. I'm going to double click on the name and say manifold, I'm not going to do all caps, manifold demo, just so people know that it isn't a real part that's going to be used. And then I'm going to click OK to make the part. And this is the error you'll get if you already have a part named with that number, so you just have to increase it by 1 and try it again, see if it takes. No, that's also a part. So you keep increasing by 1. You can also search to see if it exists, but this one doesn't. And then once you make that file, save it, and then you can actually just close it out pretty much immediately. And then I'm going to now add in that layout add in the part file that we just closed into the assembly file for lower plumbing, which will mean that I will double click on the assembly file stored within the layout file. And again, an assembly file has a -500 name, and it shares the same like prefix as the layout file. So L4004 is the layout, the file designator for lower plumbing. It matches the layout file that I'm in as well. So I'm going to double click on that to enter it. You can see the bolding changed, and if I unhide these parts within it, you can see those show up as well. Those are the parts within this assembly, and my goal is to bold this pink manifold space claim by adding that geometry, adding that part to this assembly. So now that I'm in this assembly, I'm going to go to assemblies and then add component, and I'm going to click open. I'm going to search up the file I just closed, which was L4004-007, I believe. Yeah, manifold demo. I'm going to click on that and just click apply. Don't mess around with any settings in here. And you should see that part file is now added to that assembly, but you don't see any change. So now I'm going to actually enter into that part file, and I'm going to pull in this pink geometry into it. So I'll go back to, actually I won't move around anywhere in there, but I'm going to go to Wave Geometry Linker and click that. And Wave Geometry Linker is the tool you're going to use to pull in this geometry from the layout file into this part file. So once you click on that, you just click on the geometry you want to bring in to the part file and click OK. You can now see that it's bolded, which is the thing we're after. That means the geometry is successfully loaded into the part file for this manifold demo. And again, since this is just the space claim, that'll change later, you can now go out, back out, and see that it is properly populated. And since I have the layout file for the entire rocket pulled up, I'll just show you real quick. Without really having to do anything, we have that pink manifold already in the rocket, which is kind of what we're after in the end. And again, if I ever needed to change the position of it, I can always just change the couple variables that I set up originally, like the plane height and the radial position and the angle that the manifold is set up at. You can also get clever and do other stuff as well. That's by no means the only way you can model something. And you won't always have blocks like this. You'll also have more complicated shapes, to be sure. But the name of the game is keeping it simple in geometry and relatively easy to move around. So now I'm going to upgrade this geometry a little bit to show you what a more finalized space claim would look like, and then I'm going to show you the process of dealing with a space claim after you have a more advanced or more finalized geometry. Okay, so I added a few more details to the space claim. I added ports, so other people can know where tubes and other connections need to go in and out of this thing, which would in fact affect what they're doing. So it's always good to put in ports and other interfaces like bolt patterns, stuff like that, stuff that other people would use in conjunction with just the volume you take up in their stuff. So yeah, make sure to add that to your space claim. I also made a feature group just for the space claim. This is done pretty easily by right-clicking on a feature and then going to feature group and setting that up. This helps to hide the feature group immediately when you're either not using it or modeling your actual geometry. You can also see I increased the transparency so that you can see through it, which is helpful when you cut up a more accurate geometry of, let's say, this manifold, like the actual flight manifold, which I also did as a demonstration. So you can see that the gray manifold is within the space claim more or less. It's okay if you bleed over the edge a little bit in some places. It's okay if you're, smaller than it in other planes. It's mostly just, you want to be somewhat close. So once you have like a more finalized geometry, which I'm going to call this gray one, like the final geometry, the next thing you want to do, well, actually, it doesn't have to be a finalized geometry. Once you have once you start on the real geometry, you want to wave geometry link that into the same part file that the space claim is in. So I'm going to go back to the assembly navigator here. I'm going to jump into the manifold demo. You can see that's where we have this pink manifold stored, the space claim for it at least. I'm going to go to assemblies, wave geometry linker, and I'm going to pull in the flight in quotations manifold design for that. So now we can see we have a pink space claim and a gray actual flight piece. But we only really want one of them in our rocket assembly, which is where these part files all come together into different sub-assemblies and ultimately to create the entire rocket. So we don't want this type of overlap. Once we get the real geometry, once we start on it, we want to hide and suppress the space claim because it is no longer really helping us too much. It's a kind of out-of-date version of the thing we now have. So while you're in your assembly navigator within your part, just go ahead and right-click and click suppress. And you can see that it now has a dotted box instead of the eye, and it's now the same type of grayed out that you would see from other parts that weren't added to this part file. That's good. We're only left with the linked body of the real manifold. So now I'm going to jump back out to the layout file, and I'm also going to suppress this feature group because we want to kind of cover our tracks and hide. This is fine. I ignore that. We kind of want to hide that manifold so other people can't reference it because it's now out of date. By suppressing it, you're forcing other people to change their references to the more in-date manifold that you just made. Cool. So if we go to the rocket assembly file, you can now see just this actual manifold now populates the rocket and not the space claim. But if you want to keep working, like if you want the space claim to still be visible, if you're still in the early stages, you can keep that unsuppressed and go with it that way. So yeah, that's pretty much it. All the space claims will live within the actual part file for that geometry, for that model, and you will go through the process of suppressing that space claim after you have that the actual geometry in progress. So it doesn't have to require a new file between space claims and the actual part. I hope that was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions about this stuff. I'd be happy to answer. Alright, talk to you soon.